Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's episode we'll be finalizing our ultimate version of the Demolitionist Nightblade combo, the Saboteur. This video is going to give you 3 things to make your Saboteur the ultimate death machine for the hardest difficulty in the game. Number 1, we're going to be talking about all the most important gear for the Saboteur, Fire and Cold, Shadow and Fire Strike build, and making sure that we can get absolutely all the damage necessary to kill off the biggest, baddest enemies in the game. Number 2 is going to be all of the components that we have to equip to each of these different pieces of gear in order to get our resistances and all of our defensive stats up high enough to make sure that we're not dragged kicking and screaming into the void by some big tentacly squid guy who is lost in a world full of bones and really edgy color palettes. The final thing we'll talk about in this video are the number of skills that we don't pick up until very far into Ultimate, when you've unlocked very specific parts of gear for this build to work. The reason we haven't taken them earlier is because they rely entirely on the gear to change their functionality and to make them extremely potent in conjunction with the rest of our build. But with our intro most firmly set sail, let's talk about the most important thing and probably the most fun part of this video, the gear. There will be tons of legendary gear involved in the Saboteur for Ultimate, and there's going to be quite a few monster infrequents as well that are going to make the grind of this build a lot easier. And it is because of the ease of use in finding these items, we're going to start with those. Our monster infrequents are very simple, and there are 4 of them that are going to play a very big part in how you play this build in Ultimate. The first, and probably the easiest to find, is going to be your Incendiary Cask. This helmet is going to drop like rain from the sky once you get into Act 2, and every bandit that you meet that has a flaming top on his head, looks just like a birthday candle freshly lit, comes with a pretty good chance of dropping this helmet for you. The reason this helmet is so important is because, number 1, it's going to give you a base amount of fire damage. Fire damage is one of the 2 biggest damage components for this build, so just remember that every time that you raise the floor, you raise the ceiling, meaning that you raise the flat damage of any damage type. All of the damage buffing that you're doing to that same damage type is going to be exponentially better. So as one would expect, this helmet is also going to buff your fire and burn damage, but it's also giving you chaos resistance in very large amounts, which is fantastic for Ultimate because chaos resistance is very hard to come by and fill out when it comes to maxing out your resistances. After that though, you're getting a +3 into Fire Strike, which is one of your 2 biggest abilities in this kit, so making sure that Fire Strike is buffed to its maximum point usage is a very high priority. 3 points into a single ability is very big, so don't sleep on the number 3. After the point buffing though, you are going to get a couple of changes to how your Fire Strike operates, and they are all damage buffs. Number 1, you're getting a flat 33 fire damage increase to Fire Strike with the level 94 version of this helmet, and you're going to get an 18% buff to all the crit damage that Fire Strike does as well. This build takes very good advantage of crit damage increases because it does manage to crit a pretty decent amount, especially with Fire Strike being activated as often as it does with our pretty significant amounts of attack speed. Because this is a monster infrequent, you can hunt it down or farm it up as often as needed. So if you don't get a decent roll on any monster infrequent and the enemy that you're pulling it from is pretty common, just like this helmet, you can get some really good rolls. Specifically, the one that I've picked up has 1600 armor, and it is giving me more pierce and poison resistance on top of the chaos resistance that comes built in with it. So this is a very good roll for this helmet, and it comes with tons of defensive stats. Just remember that as we're talking about more of the monster infrequents in this build, and the more that you farm them, the better opportunities that you're going to get that perfect roll that you need. Speaking of perfect rolls, we're rolling directly into our next monster infrequent, which is the Murderer's Breastplate. This is going to be another bandit monster infrequent, and you can get this from the aptly named Murderer Bandits, and that is just the most creative thing I've ever heard for a human being character in my life. That said, the breastplate is going to right off the bat convert any of your acid damage that you have hanging around into piercing damage. It's only from 24 to 36%, but really, since you're not using acid damage anyway, converting that to piercing is a good thing. Piercing is one of the backup damage types that this build has in spades, so having more of it isn't necessarily a bad thing. The breastplate is also going to give you a big chunk of defensive ability, meaning that you should hopefully get hit a lot less because of it, and more importantly than that, you're getting an increased chance for your deflection. Deflection is a stat that means you are going to avoid projectiles, so you can get anywhere from 7 to 9% increased deflect chance, and that is a pretty significant amount, especially if you compare that to what we're already getting from our Shadow Dance ability coming off of our pneumatic burst. After that though, you're also getting some built-in pierce resistance, which is incredibly useful because in Act 2, a lot of those enemies are going to be dealing piercing damage from range, and it can creep up on you real fast. As far as the points that your breastplate is going to add to your build though, you're getting +3 into dual blades and +3 into Shadow Strike. There is 2 very good reasons that we want those +3 points, and reason 1 is that dual blades is going to increase our physical resistance by a passive baseline amount. So our kit, unlike many others in the game, comes with a built-in physical resist, and we want to get that bad boy as high as humanly possible. The second reason is Shadow Strike. Having more points in Shadow Strike means more damage for our second big bad ability, and feeding that into Nightfall is going to be even more important. Shadow Strike and Fire Strike work very well together for dealing huge amounts of burst damage to single and multiple targets very, very quickly. And yet again, since the Murderer's Breastplate is a common monster infrequent, you can farm this up quickly and often to get all of the perfect stats that you want. Specifically, I got more health, more defensive ability in the percentage amount, and I got some elemental resistance to boot. So I got a very good drop on this chestplate, and I'm super happy with sticking with it. Now, the third and final monster infrequent that we're going to pick up is going to be a little bit more difficult to farm because it does drop only from a bigger enemy, and this enemy can only be found in a dangerous domain in Act 1. Gale Slice's Mark is a medal that you will pick up after you kill Gale Slice the Ruthless. This enemy is going to be found in your East Marsh. That is Act 1, so directly below your Burwitch village. Off to the east, you'll see a big open expanse of swamp. This is where you run down the quest to turn in all of the runestones of Dreeg. This is where you find Kaliska, the Bone Hunter, for that quest for Anasteria. There is a whole bunch to do off in this dangerous domain, but to find Gale Slice, you'll just walk east and then immediately turn southwest to that corner of the map. Gale Slice will be down there with a bunch of other Grobbles and Drangul, but he himself is a little bit tougher to kill than your standard bandit fare. This guy, though, is going to drop you a medal, which will be helping you buff your pierce and cold damage along with your frost damage. No flatline increases, unfortunately, but you're also getting vitality resistance, and the points that you're getting to your kit are going into your Flame Touched and Nightfall abilities. Flame Touched getting +3 is a very big deal because that's +3 more points of offensive ability increase. 3 points of OA in that ability means that you're going to be able to crit more often, and you should have a pretty significant amount from there. Nightfall getting 3 more points is just straight damage of the cold variety, and that's something that we always want to have available. After that, you're getting some big changes to those 2 abilities through this mark, and they're both fantastic. So as far as Flame Touched goes, you're getting a baseline cold damage added to Flame Touched, and you're getting a 50% conversion of chaos damage to cold damage as well. So you couple that with a couple of other chaos conversions that we've talked about, and you can see that number starting to stack up very quick. But having a baseline cold damage added to one of your permanent passives means that you're just buffing all of the cold damage that you can do over and over again. The mark is also going to turn around and take 50% of your fire damage and convert that to cold damage for your flame touched ability as well. So not only are you getting a baseline cold damage increase, but you're taking from a big pool of your main hand damage in this build and turning that into your other big main hand damage. Things are just converting perfectly with this metal, I promise you. As far as Shadow Strike goes, the other ability that is getting buffed from this metal, or I guess more specifically Nightfall, but Shadow Strike itself is getting a baseline piercing damage increase as well, and that is a huge amount. You're getting tons of piercing damage added to your Shadow Strike, which is fantastic for blazing through the armor of big angry enemies. Now, I did mention it was going to be a little bit harder to roll the perfect rolls for this metal, so you may have to kill Gallslice, find another metal, and reload if you didn't get the perfect one right off the bat. Because he is a hero enemy, he will not be as easy to farm multiple times like your standard fare bandits we just mentioned ever so slightly ago. But with those 3 monster infrequents in hand and your best rolls possible on each of them, you are going to have a much easier time hunting down your legendary pieces. That being said, there are 2 of them that are going to be more important than every other legendary piece of gear in this build. The sooner that you find these 2 items, the happier, the more exciting, and just all around better time you will have. I'm talking, of course, about our 2 main hand weapons, the Mythical Nex and Mythical Ortis single-hand blade weapons. These are legendary one-handed swords, and you can get a non-mythical version of both of these as well. So if you manage to find non-mythical Nex and non-mythical Ortis, go ahead and equip those bad boys and ride them all the way to level 94 because they are insane. The whole reason I even wanted to make this build is because I keep finding these swords and I just can't put them on anybody but a build made specifically for them. So, to begin with, we're using Nex. Nex is the cold sword, and this one is going to give you flat cold damage, as well as buffing both cold and frostburn damage, so it's raising both the floor and the ceiling instead of just one or the other for you, and it's converting a big chunk of your physical damage into cold damage as well. So physical damage is something that we get plenty of in this build, but we don't make great use of it because not a lot of our skills really incorporate it. Nex is going to help us out with that by converting it into one of our main types of damage. After that, you're getting a big chunk of health from Nex, and that is incredibly important because the Saboteur is relatively squishy for a melee class. You can liken this more to a melee assassin if you've ever played a MOBA and had a very squishy melee guy get blown up by some random damage that you were not expecting from left field. After the health bar though, you've got an increase to attack speed in a really sizable amount, anywhere from 13 to 19%, and since we're already dual wielding, we are slapping at light speed. After that, you've got Aether Resistance to back you up with +3 into your Fire Strike and +3 into your Nightfall. Because Nex and Ortis work so well in what they are going to change for these abilities, they are going to do you another favor and buff them even further. Nex is lastly going to take all of your chaos damage and convert it into cold damage for your Fire Strike, and it's going to take all of your lightning damage and do the exact same thing for your Fire Strike. So your Fire Strike is going to be dealing fire damage and cold damage. If you can find me a more perfect harmony of hot and cold, then call Katy Perry. The birthday party isn't over yet though, because Nex is going to give you an ability called Shadow Bolt that activates on a 15% chance of your attacks. This has a 0.5 second cooldown and activates in a 1.5 meter radius around you. It's dealing some of your weapon damage, but it's also dealing cold and vitality damage, with 30% of the attack damage that it does converting it to health. It's going to reduce a target's offensive ability by a pretty substantial chunk for 3 seconds, meaning that you should be a little bit tougher to hit when they get hit with this Shadow Bolt. More importantly though, I do want to go back to the 30% of attack damage converted to health, because Vampiric Attack is a very good stat for keeping melee heavy attack-focused builds alive. Vampiric Attack is something that's going to show up on a couple of items of gear for this build, and it is incredibly necessary because heals, even though we've got Pneumatic Burst, are a little bit sparse, especially when we get hit with something big and thick from the meaty boy at the end of this video. But it wouldn't be a two-piece set without the second piece, and it wouldn't be a fire and cold damage build without Ortis. Ortis is the second legendary sword in this two-piece set, and he's going to be doing everything that Nex does except fire. So Ortis is going to give you a flat fire damage while buffing it, so again, raising the floor and the ceiling for us all at the same time, while taking your physical damage and the hopefully same amount as Nex and converting that to fire damage. He's also going to give you some health, which is fantastic, just for the same reasons that it was on Nex, along with the same amount of attack speed and chaos resistance, where Nex was giving us Aether Res. These are just some fantastic ultimate coded swords, and I cannot sing the praises enough. After Chaos Resistance though, you're getting a +3 to Explosive Strike and +3 to Shadow Strike, further complementing both of these abilities with each other even more. After that, your Ortis is going to give 240 fire damage to Shadow Strike, and is going to convert 100% of the piercing damage that Shadow Strike does into fire damage. It's also going to add 12 fire damage to Flame Touched, and convert 33% of the acid damage that you do into cold damage for Flame Touched as well. So they are 100% Mobius loop complementing each other for big damage on all of these very good abilities. You're also going to go ahead and convert that remainder 67% acid damage into fire for Flame Touched, just to make sure that you know we're not giving up on fire for cold. As for the pièce de résistance on this sword, we're actually going to get a straight up healing ability with a 15% chance on attack, just like Nex, but Healing Light is going to activate on a 3.6 second cooldown, unfortunately, but it's going to give you 5% of your total health bar back with 800 health on top of that. Given that our health bar is right around 11,000, you can imagine 5% plus 800 is a sizable chunk. This is basically what it means to be a Blood Angel, Apothecary, or a Sanguine Priest, as I believe they are called. Once you've collected the Fated Duo, though, you unlock the Sacred Harmony, and this is a 2-set bonus, which is going to give you 60 offensive ability, which is a very big number for offensive ability and your ability to crit, along with +1 into all of your Nightblade and Demolitionist skills, so you get a +1 to all of the abilities you have going on all the time. Fire damage is also getting added to Flame Touched, as well as buffs for cold damage, and you're going to convert 100% of your physical damage to fire damage for Flame Touched as well. But we're not done yet. We're going to add a flat amount of fire damage to Veil of Shadow, and we are also going to give the Veil of Shadow the ability to reduce a target's fire resistance. You may not even remember that we use Veil of Shadow because it's a permanent passive, but it activates in an AoE around us, dealing flat cold damage while also reducing cold, pierce, and now fire resistance, making it an incredible way for big damage types to deal even more damage. As if there weren't enough to talk about already, you get the Sacred Balance activatable skill, which has a 100% chance to activate on a critical attack. This skill has a 1-second cooldown with a 5-ish meter target area using your weapon damage, but also dealing fire and cold damage. This ability is going to freeze a target for 2 seconds while reducing its resistances by a big chunk for 3 seconds. That means that every time that you crit, you should basically be activating Sacred Balance and making lots of frozen enemies absolutely fall apart into tiny little ice cubes that you can fill your martini with for living out all of your deepest, darkest James Bond fantasies. And once you have Nex and Ortis in their mythical version at level 94, this build absolutely soars into the heavens plus Ultra style and blows the competition into tiny molecular ash. Once you have Nex and Ortis completed, the rest of the gear on this build is a lot easier to find and basically a lot easier to work around. That being said, it's all still important, so I want to hit the high points, making sure that we don't forget any of the honorable mentions, starting with the mythical Amatox Step. These are our boots, and they are going to be buffing our cold and frostburn damage as one would expect from boots that the Blizzard guy wears. You're also going to be getting a % increase to your health bar, anywhere from 4 to 6%, which is fantastic because, like I said, 11,000 isn't a whole lot. These boots are also giving you a big chunk of defensive ability and movement speed, along with some physical resistance, so you can try and hit that 40% cap just a little bit sooner. These boots are also going to give you poison and acid resistance, followed by some vitality and slow resistance, which are perfect for our melee focused build that does not want to get stuck in the mud while surrounded by a bunch of really crazy chaos boys. After that, you're getting points into Fire Strike and Ring of Steel, with Fire Strike being a main hand ability and Ring of Steel being our secondary AoE clear ability. These are big points. After that, the Amatox Step comes with a skill that activates on a 20% chance when you are hit, and it is going to fire off the Spines of Ice. Which is on about a 2-second cooldown, but it does fire off projectiles in a wave, and these are going to pass through enemies that it hits, dealing piercing, cold, and frostburn damage just as it freezes enemies for a single second at a time. After Amatox Step, you're going to want to make sure that you have the Scourge Relic, and this one, for specifically the reason of Vampiric Attack, is going to be very important. Scourge is available at level 60, so you can get this long before you hit your ultimate spike, but Scourge gives you a cold damage, vitality damage, which we're not super interested in, and a baseline Vampiric Attack of 4 to 6%. You're also dealing more cold and frostburn buffs, with big damage increases to undead enemies, as well as % increases to physique spirit. You also get the ability Scourge Strike while I run in fear for my life, as my passives are all turned off, but the Scourge Strike is going to deal all the damage that we want it to, 425% of our weapon damage, along with cold and vitality, frostburn, and vitality decay, the ability to freeze a target for 1.5 seconds, and taking all of that damage we just mentioned, giving you 24% of it back in health. So basically, when you use your Scourge Strike, you get a big chunk of health back just for slapping someone really ridiculously hard. After the relic is done, though, there are 2 final pieces of gear that I want to mention, because like I said in the beginning of this video, there were a couple skills that we're going to pick up just because these pieces of gear require us to put only 1 point in for very big, efficient gains. The first that you're going to want are the mythical Chilling Grip of Haggard. These gloves are going to give you piercing cold damage with some frostburn buffs as well, converting piercing damage into cold damage for you, followed by the ever lovely flat health buff, attack speed buffs, and casting speed buffs. Really grade A across the board for this build, but we're also getting vitality resistance from these gloves, which is a welcome stat. But after all of those passive stats are out of the way, you're going to get a +3 to your Night's Chill, along with +2 to the first ability we're picking up way late in the game, and that is Granado. Granado is a demolitionist ability that is going to do exactly what you think it is and throw a frag grenade out in the middle of a whole bunch of enemies. On top of that, the gloves are going to give you a negative 15% attack speed to your Veil of Shadow aura, so basically anybody attacking you in your melee range is going to hit you a little bit slower. But more importantly, your Granado is going to get a flat buff to cold damage, which isn't something that comes standard on that bad boy, as well as a veritable nuclear amounts of frostburn damage as well. You're converting 100% of the physical damage that the Granado does into cold damage, and you're also taking 100% of the fire damage it does, converting that to cold as well. So now, with just these gloves, you've given yourself a cold damage frag grenade that hits in a very big AoE that you can activate from range without having to dive into what might be a particularly precarious situation. Now, the final piece of gear that is going to change your abilities and require you to put single points into Blast Shield is called the Mythical Heart of Ulswyn. This is actually part of another set, but given that we're playing a Demolitionist character, I have a feeling that we may get a decent chunk of drops for this set anyway. Ulswyn is, after all, a very fire damage focused set, so you might see one or two of these around. That being said, the Heart of Ulswyn is your amulet, and it's going to buff your fire, lightning, burn, and electrocute damage while converting physical damage into more fire damage for you. You're also getting a massive amount of offensive ability from this amulet, combined with some buffs to your health regen, which, sad to say, aren't really popping up all over the place in this gear. After your health regen, though, you're getting another big chunk of chaos resistance, followed by some elemental resistance, and increases to the maximum of your fire, cold, and lightning resistances. So those bad boys are going to go up to at least 85% from just this amulet. The amulet is then going to give you +2 to your Vindictive Flame, and the reason that we're taking Blast Shield, we are going to get a 1.5 second cooldown off of Blast Shield, but we're going to get 12% health restored to that ability. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does Blast Shield do in the first place that I would even care? But when you drop below 60% health, Blast Shield will activate, giving you a damage absorption shield, a very big chance to avoid projectiles, while giving you Pierce and Elemental resistance and 3 to your maximum resistances on everything. You're also getting 135 fire retaliation, which doesn't hurt when people hit you. It's going to hurt them instead, but having a 12% restoration of your teeny tiny little health bar is very good when you are getting hit by Sharzul, the Harbinger of Chaos. This is the boss at the end of the Bastion of Chaos, and while I did have a lot easier time with him than I did Gargable, he was still ready to punch the living life out of me. That's ultimately why Blast Shield is going to be important, because you'll happen upon big boss characters like that, and getting yourself a free panic button when you drop below 60% health is incredibly useful. There are a few other pieces of gear in this build that really help things sing and keep us alive from certain danger, but those are all located in the Grim Tools link down below, because we need to bring up this list of components instead. Components are very important for Ultimate, and given that we're running out of time at the end of the video here, I've got to lightning round these off for you guys so you have bite damage and the right survivability on all of the right items. Now, that being said, you're going to need to have a runestone in your helmet. You'll want an Aether Soul for both your medal and your amulet. You'll want to have necks outfitted with the Seal of Blades, while you have Ortis fitted with the Seal of Night. After that, your chest piece should have the Hallowed Ground component, while your shoulders have the Ugdenbog leather, and your pants come with an Ancient Armor plate. As far as your gloves go, you'll want to equip them with an Unholy Inscription, and your belt is going to have an Anti-Venom Salve. As far as your rings go, you can equip them with almost anything available, but I'm using the Mark of Illusions and a Ectoplasm for maximum energy regen. And finally, we're going to cap it off on the boots with a Mark of the Traveler for some increased movement speed and health regen. And that is only because I did not have enough ingredients to create myself a Mark of Mugdrogan. But that is it for me, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out until the end of the Saboteur Build Guide series, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you've made it this far in the video, I appreciate you, as always, for going the distance. And just so you know, I've got some things in the wings for this channel coming up very soon. I think we're going to do a little bit of an evolution, and things are going to get a little bit weird. So, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all next time. Peace out.